Next speaker of the day, actually Professor Anand Krishna, he is somewhere here, but anyway, Prashant, you want to do it? Yeah, just go ahead and do it, I think. And his first semester architectural design.
This is, you can keep the light on. Yeah, that's it. This is something which I've been doing this last semester, so it's more an experiment which is in progress. So it's not a wish list, and it happened basically because we've been finding this thing continuously happening across colleges and across teaching in 2-3 colleges over the last 15-20 years, over a long period of time, is that people shy away from teaching the earlier semesters. The first and second semester is always given off as something which you don't want to do, and people normally tend to pick up the higher semesters. And I also did that, and then suddenly you realize that somebody finally has to do this. And the reason for doing this was twofold. One, you typically encounter this thing in the later years, when you come to 6th semester, 7th, 8th and stuff like that, that there are some issues which keep cropping up in these semesters when you're doing reviews and juries and stuff like that, where things which you think these kids should have learned in the earlier semesters, they haven't. And then you complain about that in the later semesters, saying that this is knowledge that you should have. I mean, this is not something which you should be learning now. And then you realize that probably these things were not taught then, or these things were not taught properly then, or these were things which were not done then. So then how do you go back and check whether these things can actually be done? So this was taken more like a test case to see, one, to check yourself, can you actually teach first semester? And two, if you can, is there a method to it? Is there some way of doing this? So there are two parties here. Party one is the student and party two is the teacher. Now the background, like most of the other people who have talked about the first semester, they come from varied backgrounds, and you're not sure whether they've come for architecture only, or they've come from, like you said, from a dropout engineering student, or various other backgrounds. So the issue here is, how do you get this guy interested in this subject? I mean, it's easy to say that one can scare him and tell him to get lost after first semester, saying that you're not fit for this, so go and find an alternative profession. Or the other way is, can you make this guy interested in this profession? I mean, he's probably come in without interest, but is there some way that you can interest him in this profession? And two, in the process of doing this, how do you get this guy building up his confidence? Because by the end of first semester, he needs to be enthused for having been in this semester or having joined this course. So is there a method in which you could make this guy feel confident and interested in this course that he's joined? The second part is the teacher. Now, typically what happens across senior semesters also, one has been noticing, is that semesters typically don't start off with goals which the teacher has defined for himself. In the sense that, what do I want the students to learn from this particular semester, or what is his takeaway at the end of the semester? Most of the time you start off with, like people have been complaining, start off with the typology. You start off, we are doing a motel this semester, or we are doing a hotel this semester, or we are doing a campus this semester. But then, that's fine, I mean, you're doing a campus or a hotel or a motel, but then what is it that the student finally took home at the end of this semester? What did he learn? Or is he going to make the same set of mistakes again in the next semester without realizing why he's making them? So is there some way that you could set these goals, the teacher sets these goals for himself, saying that these are the things which I think the student needs to learn in the semester, and he's not going to backtrack that, in the sense that next semester nobody is going to ask him why you didn't learn this. The second, I think it is extremely essential that all design teachers, irrespective of which semester, walk into the class with immense amount of preparation. Now that is something which one finds lacking in most design studios. People walk in just like that, and then you go by intuition. I mean, depends entirely on what paper is thrown at you. I mean, you look at the design and then your class starts from there. And this is something which one has been noticing for a long period of time. So I think preparation is the key. And the third thing is this thing called prejudice, in the sense that you could be a very experienced teacher, or you could be a very experienced professional. So with both these categories, you have this problem that you have this inbuilt thing of saying that I know how to solve this. And unfortunately, your prejudice of knowing how to solve this is dumped onto the student. And it works difficult now, because you have 60 students in a class, and you have one or two design faculty handling this whole class, so you don't have the time to do this one-on-one. So typically what happens, once you start discussing ideas, you have only so many ideas with which you can work. And then after a certain point you get exhausted, and then you start throwing out solutions. One can do it like this, or one could do it like that, because the student is also not actually giving you any strong feedback, and in the process of finishing the discussion you want to close it. So that is the other thing which comes on the teacher front. The third thing is the process. This is purely for the first semester. I'm not saying this is for the next semesters. I wanted to try something this time where instead of instructing, which is typically the method in a design class where a student is doing something, he comes and shows it to you, then you instruct him on how to do it better. I thought it would be better this time to try if these guys do it first and then we'll talk about it later. In the sense that you go ahead and attempt this design first, whatever it is, you go ahead and do it, and then we'll discuss what you have done later. So the process was reversed, typically of what happens in the senior classes where you instruct a student to go through the design process and then the design develops. So here we thought that it would be better if you try it out in the reverse format, where a design problem is introduced, the student goes through the design problem without any instruction whatsoever, purely intuitively, purely out of his own understanding of the problem. And then once all the problems, all the solutions have come on board, then you sit and discuss them. And so typically the process was, we had 12 weeks to work with them, and this particular semester was a little tight because of this Dasara and Diwali and all those holidays that came in. So typically we had 12 weeks to work with, and I said we'll do 12 exercises. Every week is an exercise. And we broke this thing into 3 categories. I mean, there are some exercises in which you observe. There are some exercises, discussion is a part of all exercises obviously, and there are some exercises where you'll attempt to design. So not all exercises are based entirely on design. So there are some sets where you will go out, see something and come. The reason for this is, you find kids today browsing through lots of stuff. I mean, you see the internet, you see books, you see that, but there is very little retention power. You're just seeing too much of stuff, but then you ask a pointed question about something and the guy has no answer on it. So the problem is retention, and that retention is not happening basically because you're not observing, you're only seeing. So how do you make these kids to observe what they're seeing around them, and then that observation is then documented. I mean, you do something with that observation, and that becomes an exercise. So most of these 12-week exercises that we have done are broken into some sets. Like 3 or 4 of them have been observation exercises, 3 or 4 of them, or most of them have been, almost all of them have been model exercises, and some of them have been drawing exercises. So the point is, you do all 3 things at the same time. You're doing drawing, you're doing model, and you're doing these observation exercises, and all with no help from the design faculty, except as a post-mortem of what you have done. So the product is right now 14 exercises over 14 weeks. But one thing which works in all these cases is the objective of the exercise needs to be clear, in the sense that you can't have an open-ended exercise. And this is the other problem which I find in the higher semesters also. When you have problems which are very open-ended, say like you said, the hotel in Gulbarga or wherever else it is, unless the faculty is clear about where this problem is heading, the project could be dragged in all kinds of directions. I mean, one person is talking climatology, somebody else is talking historicity, somebody is talking context, somebody is talking neighboring buildings, somebody is talking access. The project is being dragged in 100 different directions. The student is confused. And every time a reviewer comes in, he brings in his own stuff in terms of the way he wants to see it. Now that creates still more confusion. So it's important that depending on what you want that semester to be dealing with, the issues that you want that semester to be dealing with, it is important that some of these issues are closed, in the sense that it's like saying a school versus a blind school. The minute you say it's a blind school, there are X number of areas which are automatically closed. So then it gets focused into one particular direction. It becomes easier for the student to grasp what he can do or what he can't do. That's a very crude example, but then most design exercises or most design briefs, which is, as I said, clarity of brief, is basically if the brief is not pointed and clear, you don't get your objective. Then it goes in all kinds of directions. And the last thing is, like Prem was just talking about, there is this lack of narrative, and which even Soumitra pointed just before he left, was that at thesis also you find students struggling with ideas which are not grounded, and you don't know why you're doing it. And like he said, that then you bring in your experience from your past semesters and you just crack the problem somehow. That is because nobody has taught you that it is important that you have a narrative. It is important that you have a story behind why you're doing what you're doing. And without that story, it is impossible to design. And that story, unfortunately, you can't get students to learn in the 6th and 7th semester. It's too late. And it's important that they understand right from 1, 2, 3 that you need to have the small thing or the small story for everything that you do. And hopefully, as you go up the semesters, you learn that you cannot design without that story there. So I'll just run you through one typical exercise that was done, and that is the order in which the other 12 were also done. This was typically each of these weeks starts with a 1 hour discussion on the subject. For example, this was a class on contrast. So typically I would talk for an hour on the subject, and questions, answers, whatever that has to happen over that 1.5 hours. And then they get a week from there on to finish this problem, and then they come back the next week. The next week I introduce the next problem, but then I would review the past week's problem, all 60 students amongst the 4 design lecturers, and that review then becomes the learning experience. After you have done it, then all 60 of you are sitting around with all the 60 models there, and somebody is reviewing it for you and then pointing out what was wrong with it, what is not wrong with it, whether it was overdone, underdone. All those issues are discussed in the next class. So this was just one talk which went on this subject called contrast. So I'm just talking about contrast, about shapes, and shapes which are seen, shapes which are not seen, contrast in color. Are there multiple contrasts? Is it also about texture? Is it about contrast which you feel but you can't touch? Is it about, so this subject, this talk runs for an hour. Contrast and size. Certain contrast, the orange dot is actually the same size, but then contrast makes it looks different in both the cases. Contrast in texture, contrast in color, and then at the end of it, it is broken down into contrast light, the same jali as seen from inside to as seen from outside, contrast shadow, contrast motion, movable objects, immovable objects. And then what are the concepts finally that you derive out of this? So there's a contrast on shape, there's a contrast on size, there's a contrast in color, there's a contrast in placement, there's a contrast in emphasis, the way you place the same object but emphasis brings about a contrast. And then this is a little difficult subject, which is the intellectual part of it. So this is a talk, which is about an hour's talk. Now these 6 concepts which were shown earlier become the design exercise for the next week. So the class, since it's 60, is broken down into groups of 10 each. Each one is given a subject. So you pick that subject and then you bring a model on that particular subject the next week. So I'll just run you through a set of jobs which the students have done. This is supposed to be contrast with light. And all the dark boxes denote darkness, and she puts her mobile phone on top, and the cube in the middle suddenly gets lit. And she says that cube of light in the middle is in contrast to all the boxes of darkness, and then her story is that light dispels darkness and whatever. The next one was on rhythm. The circles represent, her story in this case was, I do different things in a day, and there is time required for each of the things that I do in a day. The full circle represents a job well done. The next circle, every time I do a job, I lose a certain amount of time by not doing it optimally. So the circles then start reducing in size, but they are not complete circles anymore. The dots in the floor represent circles where I have lost time. And time once gone can't be retrieved back. Now that is brilliant. I mean, this is supposed to be an exercise on rhythm, which otherwise stands perfectly fine even without the explanation. I mean, there are circles which are rhythmic, works well as a model. But then that little story that you add to that, which is entirely thought out by the person with no help from anybody, makes that whole thing suddenly go into some other plane altogether. This was supposed to be, again, another topic in rhythm, which said influences from rhythm from nature. The girl does this thing and she says it's a butterfly. She says, explain. The straw in between, which is cut in circles, are the larvae. The triangular one is the caterpillar, and the wings which come out of that is the butterfly. So it's a transformation of a larvae to a butterfly, and the whole thing talks about rhythm. This was supposed to be exercise in deductive forms. We were doing a set of 4 exercises on forms. And with a deductive form, I said, okay, you have this 4 cubes by 5 cubes, 20 cube box, out of which you are supposed to knock off so many cubes. But in the process, you need to climb from the ground floor to the last floor. So in the process, whatever emerges out of that, try and see if you can create platforms in between and see how you engage with all the 4 sides of this box and see that you lead up to the top. So you get absolutely mind-blowing results, 60 different models every week. And then these are what are called as observation exercises. I mean, there was this thing on scale. I said, I need 4 examples of one personal scale, that is when you sit and you understand scale for yourself, a scale where a group works, a scale where a larger thing happens, and a scale when there are overlaid scales. That is, you have a personal scale or a smaller scale within a bigger scale. So you have 60 sheets produced for that. You have, like for example, she talks about a zoo where you have a scale for the individual animal, you have a scale for a group of animals, and we as people who are visitors have a scale for ourselves or whatever. I mean, it's entirely their understanding of the subject after that 1-hour class which produces this work. Then there was this one set of exercises which is talking about balance and symmetry. So the talk talked about balance and symmetry, which is dealing with motion. I mean, motion is what produces balance and hence symmetry. And early art replicates that, and then subsequently later art and blah blah. So at the end of it, there were 10 diagrams which were given, which are perfectly symmetrical, balanced diagrams. The object of the exercise is convert this diagram into a 3-dimensional model which has motion. And in the process, so this was the object, that is the model, that's how it is. Next diagram, that's the object. One more interpretation of the same diagram. This is one interpretation, that's the second interpretation. Diagram, object. Diagram, object. Diagram, object. So we are in month 3 right now. We have finished month 1, 4 problems, one on basic form. Development of forms is also related to graphics. So you bring in the graphic drawing skills, the development skills from there, and then ask them to make models of forms. You make pyramids, you make cylinders, you make domes and all that. Then you have exercise additive form, deductive form. Month 2 was on rhythm, contrast, scale, balance, symmetry. Month 3 was, which is going on right now, is anthropometry, which has 4 exercises on anthropometry. Product design, furniture design, space analysis for movement, for moving objects. Month 4 would be a small, which we have only probably 2 weeks for that, would be a design of a small personal space, which would then end this semester. Thank you.